Iwo Jima, February 19, 1945. Corporal Tony Stein hit the black volcanic sand and immediately knew the Navy had failed them. The beach was supposed to be softened. 3 days of continuous bombardment from battleships, cruisers, and bombers. Millions of pounds of ordnance dropped on an island 8 square miles small. The Japanese bunkers were supposed to be destroyed. They weren't. All around Stein, Marines were dying. Machine gun fire ripped through the landing craft before the ramps even dropped. Men who made it to the beach found themselves pinned against a steep terrace of volcanic ash, unable to move forward, unable to dig in, unable to do anything but die. The pillboxes were untouched. Reinforced concrete and volcanic rock designed to withstand exactly the kind of bombardment the Navy had delivered. And now those pillboxes were pouring fire into the helpless Marines below. Stein watched 3 men from his platoon get cut down in less than 10 seconds. Standard weapons weren't working. The M1 Garand could punch through a man, but it bounced off concrete. The bar was powerful, but not powerful enough. The Marines were bringing knives to a bunker fight, but Stein hadn't brought a standard weapon. Strapped across his chest was something that looked like it had been assembled in a junkyard. An aircraft machine gun, ripped from the wreckage of a crashed Dauntless dive bomber, mounted on a makeshift stock with a crude pistol grip. His platoon sergeant had seen it 2 weeks ago and laughed out loud. "What is that thing, Stein? Frankenstein's gun? It's a Stinger, Sarge. It's junk. That thing fires too fast to control. You'll burn through ammo in 10 seconds and hit nothing but sky. Maybe. Want to find out?" The sergeant hadn't wanted to find out. Nobody had. They'd mocked it, called it dangerous, told Stein he was going to get himself killed with his junkyard special. Now, with Marines dying all around him and the beach turning into a slaughterhouse, Stein stood up. He pointed his Frankenstein gun at the nearest pillbox, and he pulled the trigger. Before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand why Iwo Jima was different from every other battle in the Pacific. The Marines had fought through Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu. They knew Japanese defensive tactics. They'd cracked bunkers before. But Iwo Jima wasn't a normal defensive position. It was a fortress buried inside a volcano. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had spent a year turning the island into a death trap. He dug 11 miles of tunnels connecting 1,500 rooms and bunkers. He buried artillery pieces so deep that naval shells couldn't reach them. He positioned his machine guns in interlocking fields of fire that covered every inch of the landing beaches. Then he waited. When the Marines came ashore, they expected weakened defenses. 3 days of bombardment, they'd been told. Nothing could survive that. Everything had survived. The first wave took 30% casualties in the opening minutes. Men were cut down before they could take 3 steps. The beach became a killing ground, bodies piling up against the volcanic sand, blood mixing with the black ash. The Navy's shells had barely scratched the surface. Now it was up to the Marines to crack those bunkers with infantry weapons. The problem was they didn't have the right weapons. The M1 Garand was an excellent rifle, accurate, reliable, powerful, but it fired a .30 caliber round. Against reinforced concrete, it was useless. The bar, the Browning automatic rifle, was heavier, with more penetrating power, but it still couldn't punch through the Japanese positions. What the Marines needed was something that could saturate a target with so many rounds that something would find a way through the firing slits, through the ventilation holes, through any crack in the armor. They needed volume of fire that no infantry weapon could provide, unless someone built one. Here's what nobody understood about Tony Stein. He wasn't just a Marine. He wasn't just a soldier. Before the war, he'd been a toolmaker in Dayton, Ohio. He'd spent years in machine shops building precision parts, understanding how metal worked under stress. When Stein looked at a weapon, he didn't see what it was. He saw what it could become. And when he saw that wrecked Dauntless bomber sitting on a Pacific atoll, he saw the solution to a problem the Marine Corps didn't even know it had. Let me tell you how Stein built his Stinger. It started in late 1944 after Bougainville. Stein's unit was stationed on an island doing training exercises, preparing for the next operation. Stein was bored, and when a toolmaker gets bored, he starts looking for projects. He found one at the edge of the airfield, a Navy SBD Dauntless dive bomber that had crashed on landing. The pilot had walked away, but the aircraft was a total loss. It sat at the edge of the runway, waiting to be scrapped. Stein looked at the wreck and saw something beautiful. The Dauntless carried twin M230 caliber machine guns in the rear cockpit. These weren't infantry weapons. They were aircraft guns designed to fire at over 200 rounds per minute, nearly twice the rate of the bar, 4 times the rate of a ground-mounted machine gun. At that speed, the AN-M2 could put so many rounds on a target that accuracy almost didn't matter. Pointed in the general direction and let volume of fire do the work. But there was a problem. Aircraft guns weren't meant to be carried by human beings. They had no stock, no pistol grip, no way to aim them except by pointing an entire airplane at the target. Stein was going to change that. He pulled one of the AN-M2s from the wrecked Dauntless. He fabricated a wooden stock from spare lumber, shaping it to fit against his shoulder. He attached a pistol grip from a Thompson submachine gun. He mounted the bipod legs from a bar to give it stability. The result was ugly, brutally ugly. A Frankenstein monster of a weapon that looked like it had been assembled by a madman. But it worked. The first time Stein fired it, he nearly lost control. The rate of fire was so high that the gun tried to climb straight up, the recoil pushing it toward the sky. He added weight, modified the grip, practiced until his arms screamed. By the time he mastered it, Stein could hold the Stinger on target for a 2-second burst, pumping 40 rounds into a space the size of a dinner plate. His squadmates watched him practice and shook their heads. "That thing's going to get you killed, Stein. You'll burn through 100 rounds before you hit anything. Leave the engineering to the engineers." Stein just smiled and kept practicing. He knew something they didn't. The Marines were about to hit an island where every standard weapon would fail, and his junk was going to be the only thing that worked. Now here's what I want you to understand about the next part of this story. Tony Stein wasn't a superhero. He wasn't invincible. He was a 23-year-old kid from Ohio who'd figured out how to build a better weapon. But on Iwo Jima, that weapon was going to turn one man into an army, and the Japanese defenders were about to find out what 200 rounds per minute felt like. Stein crawled up the volcanic terrace with his Stinger clutched to his chest. The first pillbox was maybe 80 yards away. Its firing slit was pouring machine gun fire down onto the beach, sweeping back and forth like a deadly searchlight. Marines were dying every time they tried to advance. Stein didn't try to advance. He didn't try to find cover. He stood up. 80 yards from a Japanese machine gun nest in full view of the enemy, Tony Stein rose to his feet and pointed his Frankenstein gun at the firing slit. He pulled the trigger. The Stinger screamed. There's no other word for it. At 200 rounds per minute, the weapon didn't sound like gunfire. It sounded like tearing metal, a continuous shriek that shattered the air. 40 rounds per second poured into that firing slit. The concrete around the opening began to chip and crack. The Japanese gunner inside tried to adjust, tried to swing his weapon toward this crazy American standing in the open. He never got the chance. Stein's stream of fire found the slit. The bullets punched through into the interior. The Japanese machine gun went silent. First bunker neutralized, but Stein wasn't done. His Stinger was empty. Those 200 rounds per minute meant even a full drum magazine lasted only seconds. He stripped off his helmet and shoes. The volcanic ash was too soft, too loose. He needed bare feet for traction. Then he ran. Across open ground under fire from other positions, Tony Stein sprinted back toward the beach. He needed ammunition. The Stinger was useless without bullets, and there were 4 more bunkers waiting to kill his friends. He reached an ammo dump near the waterline, grabbed 2 more drums, sprinted back up the terrace. The second bunker was already tracking him. What happened over the next 2 hours became legend in the Marine Corps. Stein attacked the second bunker the same way he'd attacked the first, standing in the open, absorbing fire, pouring 200 rounds per minute into a concrete slit until the weapon inside went silent. Then he ran back for more ammo. Third bunker, same approach. Stand, fire, saturate, kill, run for ammo. Fourth bunker, run for ammo. Fifth bunker. Each time he ran, he did it barefoot across volcanic rock that was cutting his feet to ribbons. Each time he stood to fire, Japanese snipers and machine gunners tried to kill him. Bullets snapped past his head. Mortars exploded around him. None of them hit. Not because Stein was lucky, because he was fast. The Stinger's rate of fire meant he could suppress a position before it could respond. The volume of incoming rounds forced the Japanese to duck, to flinch, to take cover for just the second or two that Stein needed to shred their position. He was using their own survival instincts against them. Between bunker attacks, Stein didn't rest. He made 8 ammunition runs across that open beach, 8 times sprinting through mortar fire and sniper rounds to grab more drums for his insatiable weapon. On the way, he found wounded Marines. He carried them back to the beach one at a time, depositing them near the medical stations before grabbing his ammo and running back to the fight. The men watching couldn't believe what they were seeing. One guy, one junkyard weapon, making 8 barefoot ammo runs across the most lethal beach in the Pacific. By the end of the day, Tony Stein had personally destroyed 5 pillboxes and killed over 20 Japanese soldiers. He'd also helped evacuate wounded Marines who would have died without his intervention, and his feet were a bloody mess from the volcanic rock. He didn't care. The beach was secure. The Marines could finally advance, and that ugly, mocked Frankenstein gun had made the difference. Let me ask you something. How do you define a weapon? Is it the precision engineering, the official specifications, the approved designs, or is it whatever tool saves your life when everything else fails? Tony Stein's Stinger was never approved, never tested, never certified. It just worked when nothing else could, and that's the only specification that matters. Word of Stein's rampage spread through the Marine Corps within days. The officers who had mocked his weapon suddenly wanted to know how he'd built it. Other toolmakers in other units started studying the ANM-2, looking for ways to replicate what Stein had done. The Stinger became a legend, but the legend was just beginning. Stein didn't stop fighting after that first day. He was on Iwo Jima for nearly 2 weeks, carrying his junkyard weapon into some of the bloodiest combat of the Pacific War. He modified and improved the Stinger constantly. Better ammunition feed, stronger mounting points, adjustments based on what worked and what didn't. The Marines who had laughed at his creation started begging to use it. "Hey, Stein, let me try that thing. Stein, can you build me one? How many kills you got with that monster now?" Stein never gave a straight answer. He didn't care about kill counts. He cared about one thing, keeping his Marines alive, and the Stinger was doing that better than any standard weapon could. On March 1st, 1945, Tony Stein was conducting a patrol near Hill 362 when his unit came under heavy fire. True to form, he moved forward to engage the enemy while his squad mates took cover. This time, his luck ran out. A Japanese sniper found him in his sights. Tony Stein died on that volcanic rock, still carrying his Frankenstein gun, still fighting for his Marines. He was 23 years old. The citation came months after his death. The Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States. The words described what Stein had done on that first day at Iwo Jima. The 5 bunkers destroyed, the 20-plus kills, the 8 ammunition runs across open ground, the wounded Marines carried to safety under fire. But the words didn't capture what really mattered. They didn't capture the mockery he'd endured for building his junkyard junk. They didn't capture the arrogance of officers who told him to throw away his invention. They didn't capture the moment when everything everyone believed about weapons failed, and only one man's crazy idea still worked. The Medal of Honor acknowledged what Stein did. It didn't acknowledge what he proved. That sometimes the weapon everyone laughs at is the weapon that wins the battle. That sometimes the soldier with the ugly, improvised, unauthorized tool is the soldier who saves his unit. That sometimes the only specification that matters is, does it kill the enemy? Tony Stein's Stinger answered that question with 200 rounds per minute. The Stinger concept didn't die with Tony Stein. After the war, military designers studied what he'd done. They recognized that infantry units sometimes needed volume of fire that standard weapons couldn't provide. The result was a lineage of squad automatic weapons, from the M60 to the M249 SAW to modern belt-fed machine guns that give individual soldiers the kind of firepower Stein had created from a wrecked airplane. The lessons learned from improvised weapons like the Stinger shaped military thinking for decades. More importantly, Stein's story became a legend among toolmakers and mechanics who served in the military. "If it's stupid and it works," the saying went, It isn't stupid. Tony Stein proved that on a black volcanic beach in 1945. The officers called his gun junk. The sergeants called it Frankenstein. Everyone told him it was dangerous, unauthorized, impossible to control. And while they were laughing, Stein was building. While they were criticizing, Stein was practicing. While they were dying with their approved weapons, Stein was vaporizing bunkers with his junkyard monster. That's the difference between experts and warriors. Experts tell you what's impossible. Warriors prove them wrong. Tony Stein was buried on Iwo Jima. Years later, his remains were returned to the United States. He rests now at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Hawaii, surrounded by thousands of other Americans who gave everything. His Medal of Honor citation hangs in military museums. His name is spoken in Marine Corps history classes. His story is told to young soldiers as an example of innovation under fire. But if you really want to understand Tony Stein, forget the medal. Forget the citation. Forget the official words. Remember the moment. A beach covered with dying Marines, bunkers that couldn't be cracked, standard weapons failing, and one corporal standing up with a gun made from garbage, pointing it at the enemy and saying with every trigger pull what he'd been saying all along. Watch me. The generals called it junk. The sergeants called it Frankenstein. Tony Stein called it the Stinger. And on Iwo Jima, it was the deadliest weapon on the beach. If this story of innovation, defiance, and one man's junkyard genius gripped you, smash that subscribe button right now. This channel uncover the forgotten stories of World War II, the inventors who were laughed at, the warriors who broke the rules, and the moments that changed everything. Tap that bell icon so you never miss when I drop a new video. And I need to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Would you have trusted a homemade weapon built from bomber wreckage, or would you have stuck with standard issue? Share this with someone who appreciates real military history.